Hi, I'm Steven, and I make fonts as Arrow Type. Thank you for joining. Today I will be sharing a presentation I actually gave last night at a Type meetup called Type Tonight here in New York City. I wanted to share it online so more people could see it and maybe learn something or get some entertainment value from it. So, yeah, welcome, and let's get right into it. So, I'm sharing Kyrios, which is one of my several typefaces. The top two here are open source fonts available through Google Fonts and GitHub and elsewhere. The next four are fonts that I license through my website, and they're a little more text centric. And then Kyrios is a little different. It's a lot more display centric, so it's more eye catching and a little different. Kyrios' inspiration is actually a monument found in Greenwood Cemetery. And if you see it in the distance there, it is this kind of sarcophagus. Probably isn't the right choice of words for it, but it's this beautiful structure and monument with lettering on it that's very eye-catching. So on one side it says Kyrie eleison. I think that means the Lord is with us, but don't judge my Latin too harshly. These letters are kind of like coming out from the rock, which is really a cool look. And then on the other side, there's the name Mary Cook. On the sides, there are black letters, which here's a closer look at that. And you can see that it's kind of mixed between the Lombardic caps and the black letters. So I love that, kind of the juxtaposition there. This isn't the only place it's ever been done, but it's really striking. So as a type designer, when I see something so beautiful and quite unique, I sometimes want to try to make a font out of it. And that was definitely the case here. But how do we do that? Well, one possible approach would be to see the letters like this and maybe take a photo or a rubbing with graphite on paper and try to trace things as closely as you kind of possibly could. Of course, there's already a lot of judgment calls that go into trying to trace something because there's not really a single outline here on the stone as there is in when you make a vector form on a computer. But if we try to get close, we might end up with something like this. And let's do that for more of the letters so we have a bit of a larger sample size. I was already having to make some decisions to make these proportions more similar to these proportions. But if we put these together in a random word generator using those characters, the result is something like this. And it's cool looking in its way. It's not particularly easy to read. A lot of those forms are pretty different to what we're used to seeing all the time. And then to an extent, I love it in the stone carving, but when I put it into digital outlines, this lowercase a is just hideous to me. I really don't like it. So how do we get from this to what we really care about? Well, I wanted to isolate the visual things going on here that I felt were most impactful. So that included this parallelogram counterform from the O, the surprisingly geometric, pretty much circular counterforms in letters like the M and the N, as well as the Lombardic capitals. And then, of course, just the tall modularity of this condensed black letter. And then the forms of the Lombardic caps are just so captivating to me. Like, look at that capital R. And then aside from that, the A is a little bit unique for Lombardics. Usually a Lombardic A is more curvy like the rest of the things here, but this one's a little straighter diagonal. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then this mix of Lombardic capitals with these tall condensed black letter, lowercase letters was something that I really wanted to preserve as well. So I've tried to do it justice while also making it much more useful and beautiful as a digital font and, doing the things that a digital font must do. So one of the earliest tracings, I did just trace from the photographs into Lombardic capitals. And you can see I'm already starting to experiment, like compare the Y and the K from the top line to the K and the Y in the second line here. And part of the reason that I was motivated to come up with my own forms, my slightly own forms for Y and K, was just this like kind of throwaway joke I made for myself early on. And here, especially at the start of the line and the start of the word York, this Y, without anything kind of at the baseline, felt like a Greek character to me or something. It wasn't really instantly recognizable as a Y. And then similarly, the capital K looks a bit too much like an R to me. So I felt like that needed its own more K-like form to work instantly. One of the ways I tested this early on was putting it into a browser with the extension Typex. Typex is an extension that I originally made as a student, and then I was supported by Google Fonts in making it better and getting help from Roel Neeskens, who's a developer, to really improve it and expand its features. And then just recently, within the past couple of months, Google Fonts once again supported a developer, Simon Cousins, to come in and modernize it for modern Chrome. So it works again, and I'm really excited about that. But you can drag and drop a font like Kyrios or whatever font you're working on and see how it feels to actually read it at the kind of sizes that people interact with fonts rather than it being an abstract thing in your font editor. So one of the early decisions this helped me make was realizing that while this kind of contrast and very thin strokes made sense when letters are like 5 inches tall in stone, they needed to be a little bit lower contrast. So the thins needed to be a little thicker, more sturdy to work at scales that people see them maybe on a website or even headlines in print. So I thickened the thin strokes a little bit. And you can also see things like the C here, the capital C, went from this form, which is a little bit ambiguous, to this form, which is a little more obvious. So skipping ahead a lot because this was a short presentation. I had to fit it into 5 minutes last night. I added an optical size scale to Kyrios. So the bottom line here is more ideal for text, like actual text sizes, like 12 points or 16 pixels around there. And then the top line is sort of 48 pixels and above, and the middle line is in between. It's a variable font, so you can go anywhere in between here. This is how the proportions line up if you scale them to the same font size, but this is more of the relationship of sizing. You're probably seeing it bigger, though, than it's intended for. Then there's also a weight scale, a weight axis. If you're a graphic designer, you know how if you're a human who's used word processing, you know how impactful and useful a weight range is. So I added that in here as well. There are quite a few stylistic sets in this family, partly because the default uppercase had to, in my mind, be Lombardic capitals and had to adhere relatively closely to what's on the monument in Greenwood. But for instance, you might want curvier Lombardic caps if you're trying to make something that looks a little more traditional. So that's the second line. Or you might want more Roman style caps if you're trying to look a little more modern. Or maybe you want black letter caps if you're trying to match the lowercase. So these styles all exist in the upcoming version of Kyrios. Here's how they look in a simple phrase. You can see how much those differences change the vibe of a phrase. And then the lowercase really has two main styles. So the bottom row is the more legible set of lowercase, which is made for the text size, but also available in larger sizes. And then there's this traditional X in case you want to use the traditional black letter X. The numerals have a default that matches the uppercase Lombardics or Romans, but they also have black letter alternates if that's what you want. It's worth noting, I think, that the character set, which is supporting Western and Central European plus Vietnamese, is also supporting these stylistic sets because, some fonts would only do this for the basic A through Z, for instance, but to me it's important that accented characters don't break a stylistic set. If you want, you can find out more about Kyrios on my website, aerotype.com. You can buy licensing or get free trials of it, or you can find it on Future Fonts. So this was a Type Meetup presentation, so there was a bit of a discussion. I had a few questions for people there. These are kind of things on my mind as I get close to releasing a new update. And so I made a printout, which I'll show here. This printout had just two sides to it. One is my current question around spacing, and the other is my current question about the proportions of black letter caps. And then I also actually, after the fact, made this additional page of proofing to kind of see for myself what this black letter cap comparison is. So to kind of spoil the fun, and by the way, if you have opinions about this, leave them in the comments. I'm interested to hear from you. But I think that for text, the current default spacing, the tracking of the letters is just a little bit tight. So I want to extend it a little bit. This middle column is my new default. And then the column on the right is me pushing it kind of that far again, which I think is too loose. And you can see it's almost like drifting apart there. So potentially the right answer is somewhere between A and B, but I'm still slightly figuring that out. And then here, one feeling I've had about the black letter alternates in Kyrios is that they're a little bit too narrow compared to the lowercase. Even though they really keep the dimensions pretty closely, they're just kind of stretched upwards a lot of the time. So in a phrase like New York City, you can see some of them just look way too narrow to me. So I've tried expanding them by a certain amount, and I'm still playing with that. I think maybe, again, the right answer could be somewhere between these two extremes. Especially here, the bottom row is this wider set of alternate black letter uppercase, and I think it's just it looks a little stretched still. So I'll probably condense it just slightly. And I think what I'll try to do is just try to roughly match the overall proportions of the default caps. I feel like that would be a pretty good solution. So that's what I'll be working on next in the family. But thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you found that enjoyable, possibly even educational. And if you're working on a creative project of your own, I hope it's going great. I hope you're having a good day. Thank you and take care.